Ethan loved the view from his penthouse apartment. From the 27th floor, he could see all of Los Angeles stretching out before him, endless streets, sparkling lights, and towering skyscrapers. He had worked hard to get here. The years spent in architecture school, the grueling internships, the sleepless nights, it had all paid off. He had a career that he was proud of, an apartment that was a reflection of his success, and a fiancée he thought was the love of his life, Claire. He met her at a gallery opening 4 years ago, and from that moment on he was hooked. She was beautiful, charming, and intelligent, and they seemed to have the perfect connection. They had been together ever since, building a life they both dreamed off, a wedding planned for next month, a future filled with promise. Everything had seemed perfect, until now. It was a Thursday evening, when the world as Ethan knew it came crashing down. He had finished an exhausting meeting with a new client, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he could finally relax. He decided to surprise Claire by coming home early from work. She had been acting distant the past few days, but he thought it was just the stress of wedding planning getting to her. He wanted to show her that he cared, that everything was fine, and that they were ready for their future together. When he walked into the apartment, the first thing that struck him was the sound of laughter, familiar, comfortable laughter. He smiled, thinking that Claire was on the phone with her best friend, planning the final details for the wedding. He didn't want to interrupt, so he quietly put his briefcase down and moved toward the living room. But as he approached the doorframe, something in his gut told him something was wrong. He paused, and his heart skipped a beat. The laughter he had heard earlier was followed by another sound, one that made his stomach twist. Claire's voice, soft and breathy, mixed with the deeper tones of another man. Ethan froze. His mind raced, and for a moment he thought maybe he had misheard. Maybe it was just her talking to her friend, or maybe a work colleague had stopped by. But as he took a step forward, his eyes caught sight of something he could never unsee. Claire was sitting on the couch, her body pressed up against another man. They were laughing, but it wasn't the laughter of two friends. It was the laughter of two people who shared something far more intimate. His best friend, Ryan, was sitting next to her, his hand resting on her leg. Their faces were close, too close for comfort. And before Ethan could even process what he was seeing, Claire leaned in and kissed Ryan. The shock hit him like a tidal wave. His breath caught in his throat, and for a split second, the world around him seemed to stop. The image in front of him blurred, as he tried to make sense of what was happening. His best friend Ryan, the man he had known for over a decade, was kissing his fiancée. His mind raced, his pulse quickened, and the anger surged through him like fire. Ryan noticed him first. His eyes widened in shock, and he quickly pulled away from Claire, stammering something that Mark couldn't quite hear. But Claire's eyes were wide too, filled with surprise and panic. But it was too late. Ethan had seen enough. The next few moments felt like a blur. He turned on his heel and left the apartment, his body shaking, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know where he was going, but he had to get out of there. His legs carried him to his car, but he didn't even remember getting inside. The only thing he knew was the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. Ethan spent the next few days in a haze. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't eat. He could hardly think. His mind kept returning to the image of Claire and Ryan together, their lips locked in a kiss that he could never unsee. It was like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding, a knife twisting deeper every time he thought about it. He had tried calling Claire, but she didn't answer. It was like she had vanished from his life. Her voicemail was filled with apologies, but the words felt hollow. He couldn't bring himself to listen to them. The truth was too painful. Ethan stayed at his brother's house for a few days, away from the apartment, away from everything that reminded him of Claire. It felt like a bad dream, something that wasn't really happening. But as the days passed, he realized it wasn't a dream. It was his life, his reality now, and it was crumbling around him. On the 5th day after the discovery, Ethan agreed to meet Claire. He wasn't ready, but he had to do it. He had to see her face to face. He had to hear the truth, no matter how much it hurt. They met at a small cafe, a place they used to visit when they first started dating. Ethan had always liked it because it was quiet, peaceful, nothing like the chaos that had overtaken his life. He hadn't been able to bring himself to go back there since the confrontation, but he couldn't avoid it forever. When Claire walked in, her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and the sight of her made Ethan's heart ache. He had once loved her so deeply, trusted her completely, and now she was a stranger to him. "Ethan," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. She sat down across from him, her hands wringing together nervously. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. I've ruined everything. Ethan couldn't speak. The anger was still there. But more than anything, there was just a numbness. He didn't know what he was feeling anymore. Everything seemed to be spinning out of control. I never meant for this to happen, Claire continued, her voice shaking. It was a mistake. I was confused, and I don't know what came over me. But I swear, Ethan, it didn't mean anything. It was a one-time thing. I love you. I've always loved you. Ethan stared at her, unable to process her words. A mistake? He repeated, his voice low but filled with incredulity. Claire, you were going to marry me. You were about to spend your life with me. And you were with him. My best friend. Claire's face crumpled, and she reached for his hand. But Ethan pulled away. The simple act of her touching him felt wrong, like a betrayal in itself. I don't know what to say, Claire whispered. I wish I could take it back. I wish I had never done it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind swirling. I can't do this anymore, Claire. I can't trust you. Not after what you've done. Not after what he's done. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. I can't be here. I can't be with you. This is over. And with that, he left. The next few days were filled with anger and pain, but also a strange sense of relief. He was free, even if the thought was hard to accept. He had been living a lie, and now he had to face the reality. His life, the one he had planned, was no longer possible. But Ethan wasn't going to let this break him. It would take time, but he would heal. He had to. The life he had once envisioned was gone, but that didn't mean he couldn't create something new. He would rebuild, one step at a time. And in that small moment of realization, for the first time in a while, he felt a sliver of hope. The next few weeks after leaving Claire were an emotional whirlwind for Ethan. He hadn't fully processed the gravity of what had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the years of trust, shattered in the blink of an eye. But as the days passed, he began to feel something he hadn't anticipated. A sense of freedom. He had spent so long trying to hold on to the life he thought he would have with Claire. But now that it was gone, he realized that the life he had been living wasn't really his. It was a life shaped by expectations his own and those of the people around him. He had built it around someone else, someone who didn't value what they had as much as he did. And now, he had the chance to rebuild. The first step was leaving Los Angeles. It wasn't that he hated the city. On the contrary, it was a place full of opportunities, the city of dreams. But for Ethan, it had become a place of painful memories, places where he had walked with Claire, where they had shared laughter, dreams, and promises. It was too much for him to stay there, knowing it was all a lie. Ethan had always been drawn to the idea of getting away from everything, starting fresh in a place where no one knew him. No one had expectations of him. That's when he remembered a small town in the mountains where he had gone on a solo trip a couple of years ago. The peace, the isolation, the sense of clarity he had felt in that town stayed with him. It was a place to reset, to breathe without the weight of the world on his shoulders. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. He packed his bags in the quiet of his apartment, every item he put into his suitcase, feeling like one more step toward letting go of the past. He wasn't just leaving behind Claire. He was leaving behind a version of himself that no longer served him. The person who had relied on external validation, who had worked tirelessly to build a perfect future, only to have it come crashing down. The drive to the small mountain town took 6 hours, and as he crossed the city limits of Los Angeles, he could feel a weight lift off his shoulders. The hum of the city had always been a constant buzz in the background of his life. Now, it was replaced by the peaceful quiet of the open road, with the only sounds being the low hum of his car and the occasional rustle of trees in the wind. When he arrived, the air was different, crisp, fresh, and invigorating. The town was small, nestled between towering pine trees and rocky cliffs, with a few winding roads and a population of only a few thousand people. Ethan had rented a small cabin at the edge of town, a place secluded enough to give him space, but close enough to the heart of the town for him to explore. The first night was uncomfortable. He sat on the porch of the cabin, staring out at the mountains in the distance, feeling a strange mix of loneliness and peace. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't surrounded by noise. There were no phone calls, no emails, no endless tasks to complete. Just him, the quiet night, and the stars above. But with the quiet came the realization that he was truly alone, not just physically, but emotionally. He hadn't had time to process the depth of his heartbreak. He hadn't allowed himself to fully feel the pain of losing Claire. Instead, he had kept moving forward, trying to escape it. That night, as he lay in bed, the silence felt suffocating. He couldn't help but think about Claire. What had gone wrong? How had things gotten so out of hand? There were so many questions, but no answers. He was left with the empty space she had left behind, and he didn't know how to fill it. The next morning, Ethan woke up early, as he usually did. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft, golden glow across the mountains. He went for a walk, taking in the quiet of the town. The streets were empty, save for a few locals walking their dogs or picking up groceries. The slower pace of life felt alien to him at first, but soon he began to appreciate the stillness. Ethan had always been a man of routine, and that hadn't changed. But now, his routine wasn't filled with deadlines and meetings. It was filled with small, quiet moments of reflection. He spent his days walking the trails in the mountains, visiting local cafes, and spending time reading in the cabin. But even with all the peacefulness surrounding him, there was still a lingering sadness he couldn't escape. The pain was still there, but it had softened a little, and that was something. 3 weeks into his stay in the mountain town, Ethan found himself in the local bookstore, a small, rustic shop with creaky wooden floors and shelves, filled with everything from classic novels to travel guides. He wasn't much of a reader, he had always preferred practical books, textbooks, things that taught him how to succeed. But something about this place drew him in. Maybe it was the scent of aged paper, or the idea that the books were a way for the locals to escape, just like he was. He wandered through the aisles, running his fingers along the spines of the books, when one in particular caught his eye. It was a memoir of a woman who had rebuilt her life after a devastating divorce. The title spoke to him. Starting Over, A Journey of Rebuilding. Ethan felt a pull toward it and picked it up, flipping through the pages. The book was raw, honest, and painfully relatable. As he read, he found himself connecting with the author's story. She had lost everything: her marriage, her sense of identity, and had to start over. But through her journey, she had found strength she never knew she had. It was as if the words on the pages were speaking directly to him. That evening, Ethan sat by the fireplace in his cabin, the book in his hands. The fire crackled as he read, and he could feel the weight of his own heartbreak begin to lift. He was slowly coming to terms with the fact that his life had changed, that the woman he had loved was no longer the woman he had thought her to be. But reading about someone else's journey of healing gave him hope. It showed him that he too could rebuild. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan started to feel the gradual shift within himself. He had stopped running from the pain and started confronting it. He took long walks, reflecting on his life, his choices, and the people who had shaped him. He made a conscious effort to not dwell on Claire or the betrayal. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his healing. One afternoon, as Ethan was hiking up a trail he had never explored before, he came across a small clearing in the forest. There was a bench sitting in the center, facing the mountains. He sat down, letting the silence wash over him. For the first time in months, he felt a sense of peace. The kind of peace that came not from avoiding the past, but from accepting it. From understanding that life was unpredictable, and sometimes things fell apart, but that didn't mean it was the end. Ethan took a deep breath, letting the cool mountain air fill his lungs. He was no longer running from his past. He was embracing it, learning from it, and allowing it to shape who he was becoming. The days in the small mountain town had started to blur together for Ethan. At first, the silence had been suffocating, but now it was starting to feel like a balm. Each morning, he woke up to the soft chirp of birds outside his window and the cool breeze of the mountain air. He didn't rush through his days anymore. He no longer had the need to fill every moment with distractions. He spent his time reading, hiking, and reflecting. But even in this quiet haven, Ethan couldn't avoid the fact that his life was still a puzzle, with pieces scattered everywhere. One thing Ethan had learned over the past few weeks was that solitude was both healing and dangerous. It allowed him to reflect, but it also kept him too focused on the past. The problem with being alone too long was that you were left with only your thoughts. And sometimes, those thoughts were more painful than anything. It was time for a change. Ethan realized that, as much as he enjoyed his time alone, he needed to engage with the world again. He needed to forge new connections, to break out of the self-imposed isolation he had buried himself in. This small town was full of people, and he wasn't going to spend the rest of his life hiding from them. It began with a chance encounter at the local farmers market. Ethan had visited the market a few times before, picking up fresh produce, homemade jams, and other small items. But today, he walked through the stalls with a different purpose: to talk to people, to reconnect with humanity. As he walked past a stand selling fresh bread, a voice called out to him. "Hey there, Are you new in town? The voice asked. Ethan turned to see a woman in her mid-30s, wearing a red apron and a bright smile. She was standing behind a small table covered with loaves of bread. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she had an easygoing, warm vibe about her. Yeah, Ethan replied, offering a smile of his own. I'm still getting used to this place. I figured, she said with a wink. Most of the tourists don't stick around long. The town's too quiet for some people, I suppose. Ethan chuckled, realizing she had a point. Yeah, it's definitely a change from the city. But it's nice, peaceful. Peaceful, huh? Well, I guess you'll get used to it, she said, handing him a loaf of rustic-looking sourdough bread. I'm Lily, by the way. I run this little bread stand here, and you are? Ethan, he said, taking the bread and glancing at the sign next to her booth that read, Lily's Artisan Breads. Nice to meet you. Lily smiled warmly. I've been here for a few years now. If you ever need tips on local spots to visit or just want to talk, I'm your girl. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure whether he wanted to open up to a stranger, but there was something about Lily's openness that made him feel at ease. Thanks, he said, giving her a grateful nod. I might take you up on that. Over the next few days, Ethan visited Lily's stand again. At first, he went for the bread. There was something comforting about the freshly baked loaves, the smell of warm dough filling the air. But soon, it became less about the bread and more about the conversations. Lily was easy to talk to, and over the weeks, he found himself looking forward to their chats. She was warm and funny, but there was also a depth to her that drew him in. She talked about her life in the small town, her journey to becoming a baker, and how she had left behind a fast-paced life in Los Angeles to find peace in the mountains. She shared stories of her family and friends, and slowly, Ethan began to feel like he had found someone he could relate to. Lily, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in Ethan's story. She had noticed the sadness in his eyes when he first came to the market and often asked how he was doing. He wasn't sure if it was just her nature or if she was picking up on the fact that he had been struggling, but Ethan found it easier to talk to her than he had with anyone in a long time. One afternoon, after a long conversation about bread making and the beauty of simplicity, Lily looked at him and said, You know, you can't hide out here forever, right? Ethan was taken aback. What do you mean? She smiled, her eyes softening. You're healing, sure. But you can't keep running from the world. Eventually, you're going to have to live again. Don't let the quiet fool you. You still have a life to live. Ethan hadn't expected such bluntness from her, but her words hit him harder than he realized. He had been running for so long, trying to escape the pain, the heartbreak, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding and start living again. Later that evening, after closing the shop and walking back to his cabin, Ethan found himself reflecting on Lily's words. Maybe she was right. He had been hiding from the world, avoiding the things that might force him to confront his emotions. He had built a fortress around himself, a wall of solitude, and had convinced himself that it was enough. But the truth was, it wasn't. The next day, he decided to take a small step. He reached out to the town's local community center and asked if there were any volunteer opportunities. They had a few programs running that needed extra hands, and Ethan figured it was a good way to get involved with the community without diving into something too overwhelming. He also started going on more hikes, exploring areas of the mountain town he hadn't seen before. He had always loved the outdoors, but lately, the hikes had felt like a form of therapy, helping him clear his mind and reconnect with himself. As he became more involved in the community, he started noticing other small changes in himself. He began to feel lighter, like the weight he had been carrying for months was starting to lift. The ache in his chest wasn't gone, but it was less consuming. He was opening himself up to new experiences, new people, and new opportunities. A few weeks later, Lily invited him to join a local group for a potluck dinner at the community center. It was informal, a chance for the town's residents to come together, share food, and get to know one another. At first, Ethan hesitated. He had always been a little wary of social gatherings, but something in his gut told him it was time to step outside of his comfort zone. The potluck was a casual affair tables, filled with dishes ranging from homemade casseroles to freshly baked pies. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, with laughter and chatter filling the air. As Ethan walked in, he was greeted with smiles and introductions. For the first time in months, he felt like he wasn't invisible. He was part of something. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. By the end of the evening, Ethan found himself laughing and sharing stories with the people around him. The weight of his past wasn't gone, but in those moments, it didn't matter. He was no longer alone in his grief, and that made all the difference. As he left the community center that evening, walking back to his cabin under the starry sky, Ethan realized something important. He wasn't just healing, he was living again. Ethan had started to settle into his new life in the mountain town, and for the first time in months, he was beginning to feel like a whole person again. His daily routines were simple, but they brought a sense of peace he hadn't known since before everything had gone wrong with Claire. The work at the community center was fulfilling, and he had made a few new friends. The potluck dinner had been a turning point, a catalyst for his transformation. Ethan was no longer the man hiding from the world, he was beginning to embrace it once again. But despite all the progress he had made, there was still a lingering feeling he couldn't shake. The past, his past, still haunted him. He hadn't fully dealt with the anger, the hurt, and the betrayal he had experienced. He had moved to the small town to escape, to heal. But now he realized that healing wasn't just about running away. It was about confronting what had happened, facing it head-on, and accepting that it was a part of him. It was a Saturday morning when Ethan made the decision. He had been up early, as he often was, enjoying the crisp mountain air. He had gone for a long hike, letting the solitude and the beauty of the natural world wash over him. But when he returned to his cabin, he couldn't ignore the ache in his chest any longer. It was time to face it. He sat down at the small wooden desk in his cabin, his phone in hand. He had spent days trying to decide whether or not to call Claire. The idea of hearing her voice, of confronting her about what had happened, filled him with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and even fear. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but deep down he knew it was something he had to do. Taking a deep breath, Ethan dialed her number. The phone rang twice before Claire picked up. Her voice, when it came through the line, was soft and uncertain. "Ethan, is everything okay?" "I don't know," he said, his voice steady but his heart pounding in his chest. "I think it's time we talk." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." Claire's voice trembled. "I've been waiting for you to call, but I didn't know if you ever would." I don't want to hear your apology, Claire," Ethan interrupted, his voice surprisingly calm. "Not yet. I need to understand. I need to know why." There was another silence, but this time, Claire didn't respond immediately. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking. "But I've thought about everything every single day. And I don't have an excuse. It was a mistake, Ethan. A terrible, stupid mistake. I never meant to hurt you." Ethan clenched his jaw, the words stinging more than he expected. He had imagined this moment 100 times in his mind, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like any kind of closure. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but it wasn't this. He had hoped for something, anything, to make sense of it, but now, standing face to face with the reality of it all, he felt more lost than ever. "You hurt me, Claire," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You hurt me in ways I didn't think were possible. But what hurts even more is knowing that you did this with Ryan. My best friend. You let me trust him. Let me believe that we were family. And I didn't want to hurt you," Claire cried. "I swear I didn't. I wasn't thinking, Ethan. I never intended for this to happen. It just spiraled. I don't know how it did, but it did." Ethan could hear the raw emotion in her voice, but it didn't change the fact that everything he had believed in was gone. The life they had built together was a lie. The future he had imagined was now just a faded memory, slipping through his fingers like sand. "I don't know what you expect me to say," he said quietly. "I don't know how you think we can fix this. I can't go back, Claire. I can't trust you anymore. I can't trust him either, and I can't live in the shadow of this forever." "I understand," she said, her voice small. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, Ethan. I'm just asking for a chance to explain, to try to make things right." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He sat there in silence, listening to the sound of his own breath, trying to gather his thoughts. In the end, he realized there was nothing left to say. He didn't need her explanations. What he needed was to let go, to stop living in the past. "Goodbye, Claire," he finally said, his voice firm. "I can't do this anymore. It's over." He hung up the phone before she could say another word. Ethan stared at the phone for a long moment, the weight of the conversation settling in. He had finally said the words he needed to say. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The pain wasn't gone, and it wouldn't be for a long time. But he was starting to take the first steps toward healing. He put the phone down and stood up, walking to the window. The sun was setting over the mountains, casting a warm golden light across the valley below. It was beautiful, peaceful. The world outside was moving forward, and so was he. For the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel like he was stuck in the past. He wasn't letting the betrayal control him anymore. He had faced it, confronted it, and now he could finally begin to move on. It was a slow process, but it was a process he was ready for. That evening, Ethan decided to take another step forward. He had been in the town for a little over a month now, and while he had made progress, he still felt disconnected from the community. He knew he needed to find a way to engage with people, to open himself up to new relationships and experiences. So, he made his way to the local cafe, a small, cozy place that was always buzzing with activity. He had been there a few times for coffee, but today, he was determined to strike up a conversation with someone. He ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching the people go by. It wasn't long before a woman sitting at the next table caught his attention. She was reading a book, sipping on her own coffee, and seemed completely absorbed in the world of her pages. Ethan had seen her in the cafe before, but they had never spoken. Today, however, he felt an unexpected urge to introduce himself. He took a deep breath, walked over to her table, and offered a friendly smile. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She looked up, surprised but not unwelcoming. "Sure," she said with a small smile, closing her book. "I don't mind at all." Ethan sat down, grateful for the warmth of the conversation. It was a small step, but it was a step. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of connection. It wasn't a romantic connection, at least, not yet, but it was a human connection. And that, he realized, was what he had been missing all along. As they chatted, the tension in Ethan's chest began to loosen. He could feel the heaviness starting to lift, piece by piece. His past was still there, still a part of him, but he didn't have to carry it alone anymore. And that was the beginning of something new. The next few weeks, in the small mountain town, were a turning point for Ethan. He had begun to let go of the shadows of his past, or at least learn to live with them. The deep, empty ache that had once consumed him wasn't as overwhelming anymore. It still flared up occasionally, when the nights were too quiet, or when his mind wandered back to Claire and the betrayal, but it no longer controlled his life. He was learning to breathe again, to take things one day at a time. A large part of his healing came from the people around him. As he slowly stepped out of the isolation he had put himself in, he found that the town had a way of wrapping him in a warmth he had forgotten existed. The locals, kind-hearted and simple, were eager to welcome him into their world, and Ethan, though hesitant at first, found himself responding in ways he hadn't anticipated. One of the first steps was his connection with Lily. She had been a constant presence in his life since their first meeting at the market. She had a way of making him feel like he was exactly where he needed to be, even if it was just in a small town in the mountains. Their interactions had started with casual chats about bread, but now they had become deeper. They spent more time together, talking about everything from their personal histories to their dreams and hopes for the future. For the first time, Ethan realized how much he had been missing human connection. Lily had invited him to another community event, a volunteer day, to help clean up a local park. It was a casual event, not mandatory, but it was one of those small-town gatherings that seemed to bring everyone together for a good cause. Ethan wasn't sure what to expect, but he agreed to join. As he showed up with a pair of old work gloves and a bottled water, he was greeted with smiles from familiar faces, people he had seen around town but hadn't yet spoken to much. "Ethan, glad you could make it," Lily called as she waved him over. She was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Save the trees," her eyes bright with excitement. "Thanks for inviting me," Ethan said, walking over to where she stood. "I thought I'd put my free time to good use." Lily handed him a trash bag. "That's the spirit. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. But we've also got a picnic planned afterward, so it'll be worth it." As the hours passed, Ethan worked alongside the locals, picking up trash, planting trees, and clearing debris from the walking paths. The physical labor wasn't strenuous, but the camaraderie felt good. There was something about working side by side with strangers who were now becoming more like friends. It wasn't just about cleaning up the park. It was about building something together, a shared experience, a common goal. By the time the cleanup was over, Ethan was covered in dirt and sweating. But he didn't mind. He felt a sense of accomplishment that he hadn't realized he was missing. And when the picnic began, with food spread out on picnic tables and people laughing and talking, Ethan found himself smiling, genuinely enjoying the moment. There were no distractions, no lingering doubts, just people coming together to enjoy a day in the sun. As they sat at the picnic table, Ethan couldn't help but feel grateful. It was a simple moment, but it was one that marked another step forward in his healing journey. He was beginning to realize that the more he allowed himself to engage with the world, the more it felt like the pieces of his life were falling back into place. That evening, as he walked back to his cabin, Ethan felt lighter. The fresh air, the sounds of laughter in the distance, and the sense of connection to something larger than himself were all things he hadn't realized he needed. His world hadn't been destroyed, it had been reshaped, and for the first time, he felt like he was starting to see the beauty in this new version of his life. Over the next few weeks, Ethan continued to engage with the community. He volunteered for more local events, participated in town hall meetings, and even joined a hiking group. Slowly but surely, he started to form bonds with people. It was not always easy, and there were moments when he felt like an outsider, especially when the conversation turned to subjects he felt were too personal. But he pushed through, knowing that this was part of the process. He wasn't just trying to find his place in the town, he was also trying to find his place in the world again. One afternoon, Ethan ran into one of his new acquaintances, a local teacher named Sarah. They had met at the community cleanup, and she had taken an interest in his background as an architect. She was passionate about environmental education, and she had been trying to get a few local schools involved in a program to promote sustainable building practices. "You know, Ethan," Sarah said as they walked along the riverbank near town, "I was talking to the local school board about this new project I've been working on, and I think you could really help us with it. You've got the expertise, and we're in need of someone who can bring this to life. It would be a community effort, and I think it's something that could really inspire the kids." Ethan paused for a moment, surprised by the offer. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. I've been out of the game for a while, and I'm still trying to figure things out." "I get that," Sarah said with a sympathetic smile. "But I think this could be good for you. You've got the experience, and this could be a way for you to get back to your roots, helping others, teaching them, and making a positive impact on the community." Ethan considered her words. The idea of working on something that had real purpose, something that connected with his skills and passions, seemed like just what he needed. It would be challenging, but it could also be the next step in his journey. It was the opportunity to rebuild not just his life, but also to give back to the community that had embraced him. "I'll think about it," Ethan said after a pause. "I appreciate you thinking of me. It sounds like something worth exploring." Sarah smiled, satisfied with his response. "Take your time. We'll be here when you're ready." The following days were filled with a mixture of reflection and action. Ethan spent time walking through the town, taking in the little details that made it unique: the quaint bookstore with the scent of old paper, the river that wound its way through the valley, the towering pine trees that seemed to reach toward the sky. Each walk, each conversation, each new connection he made brought him closer to realizing something he had forgotten. Life could still be beautiful. The offer to help with the environmental program had planted a seed in his mind, and over the next few days, Ethan found himself researching sustainable architecture practices. He was learning, reigniting his passion for the field that had once consumed him. But now, it wasn't just about buildings. It was about making a difference, about creating something that would outlast him. He was starting to see that his skills, his passion for design, could be used to help others, something he had lost sight of when he had been caught up in the whirlwind of his life in Los Angeles. One evening, as Ethan was sitting by the fire in his cabin, reading a book, he received a call from Lily. They hadn't spoken in a couple of days, and he was surprised to hear from her. "Hey, Ethan," Lily said, her voice warm. "How's everything going?" "It's good," he replied, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Busy but good. I've been thinking a lot about that project Sarah mentioned. I think I'm going to give it a shot." "That's great." Lily's enthusiasm was palpable. "I knew you'd come around. This town could really use your talents. And honestly, I think it's going to be good for you. It'll help you move forward." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire. He had come a long way since his arrival in the town. And though the future was still uncertain, he finally felt ready to step into it. He was no longer the man hiding from his past. He was the man rebuilding his future. Ethan's decision to get involved with the local community project brought a sense of purpose he had been missing for months. The idea of contributing to the future of this small town, of using his skills to make a lasting impact, was a welcome shift from the emotional chaos of his past. But he quickly realized that this new venture, as rewarding as it was not without its own challenges. The environmental initiative Sarah had mentioned was ambitious. The plan was to design and implement sustainable building practices for the town's growing number of eco-conscious residents. Schools, community centers, local businesses all needed to adopt more environmentally friendly structures. It was a lofty goal, and Ethan's expertise as an architect was crucial to its success. The first meeting of the project team took place at the community center, where a small group of locals, most of whom Ethan had met through his volunteer work, gathered around a large table. Sarah was there, as well as a few educators, town council members, and business owners. Everyone seemed excited about the potential, but there was an underlying tension in the air. It was clear that there were a lot of ideas, but also a lot of uncertainty about how they would execute them. Ethan sat at the head of the table, listening intently as the others discussed plans for sustainable energy solutions, the integration of green spaces, and ways to make the project financially viable. It was a lot to take in, but Ethan felt invigorated. For the first time in a long time, he was back in his element, strategizing, problem-solving, and envisioning a future that could benefit everyone. After the meeting, Sarah approached him, her face lit up with enthusiasm. "So, what do you think?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "I think it's ambitious," Ethan replied, nodding slowly. "But I also think it's exactly what this town needs. There's a real opportunity here to do something impactful. We just need to be strategic about how we move forward." Sarah grinned. "Exactly. I knew I could count on you." Ethan felt a strange sense of pride, but he also knew that this would not be an easy project. The logistical challenges were daunting: coordinating contractors, sourcing sustainable materials, managing costs, and navigating local regulations. It was a complex web of obstacles, but Ethan welcomed the challenge. He had faced bigger projects before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just about building structures. It was about building trust, relationships, and a future that would outlast him. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan dove deeper into the project. He met with contractors, reviewed blueprints, and attended countless meetings. He was pushing himself harder than he had in years, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the familiar thrill of his work. But despite his passion for the project, there were moments when he couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. The town had welcomed him, yes, but he was still an outsider in many ways. There were times when he felt like he was still carrying the weight of his past, and he couldn't fully immerse himself in the present. His work was a distraction, but it was also a reminder that he had once been someone who had everything only to lose it all. Sometimes, the quiet moments were the hardest. He'd found himself sitting alone on the porch of his cabin late at night, staring out at the starry sky. He had made progress, had built new friendships, started new projects, and learned to let go of some of his past pain. But there was still a part of him that wondered if he could ever really move on. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings, Ethan decided to take a break. He grabbed his backpack and set off on a trail he had been meaning to explore for weeks, a path that led up to the highest peak in the area. The hike was steep, but Ethan welcomed the physical challenge. As he climbed higher, the mountain air grew thinner, but he pushed on. The physical exertion gave him something to focus on, something that kept his mind off the nagging doubts that always seemed to creep up on him. When he reached the summit, he sat down on a large rock, looking out over the vast expanse of the town below. The view was breathtaking: rolling hills, dense forests, and the small, quiet town nestled in the valley. The air was crisp and cool, and for a moment, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. But that peace was short-lived. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his reverie. He pulled it out, checking the message. It was from Lily. "Hey, I've got something important to talk to you about. Can you meet me at the cafe tomorrow? I think it's time we had a real conversation." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure why, but the message made him uneasy. What did she want to talk about? Was something wrong? He had grown fond of Lily in the months since they'd first met. She had become a friend, a confidante. But lately, their conversations had become more frequent, more personal. He wasn't sure where it was heading, but part of him was afraid that whatever she had to say could change everything. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his mind. The view before him was still stunning, but his focus had shifted. He had been so consumed with work and rebuilding his life that he hadn't taken the time to reflect on what he truly wanted. What if this conversation with Lily was the next step in his journey? What if it meant that he was ready to open himself up to something new, something more? The next morning, Ethan met Lily at the cafe. She was sitting at a corner table, stirring her coffee absently, her brow furrowed. When she saw him approach, she offered a small smile, but there was a hint of nervousness in her eyes. "Hey," Ethan said as he sat down across from her. "What's going on? You seemed pretty serious in your message." Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking about something, Ethan," she said quietly, "and I don't want to leave anything unsaid." Ethan's pulse quickened. He didn't know what to expect, but he had a sinking feeling in his stomach. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lily took a deep breath, her hands gripping the mug tightly. I know we've become close over the last few months, and I've really enjoyed our time together. You've been a great friend to me, and I think you're an incredible person. But I need to be honest with you about something. I'm not just looking for friendship, Ethan." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected this. His heart skipped a beat as he processed her words. "I've been thinking about this for a while," Lily continued, her voice soft but firm. "And I know it's probably not the right time, with everything you've been through. But I have feelings for you. I just needed to tell you that, because I think you deserve to know." Ethan was silent for a moment, trying to process what she had said. Part of him wanted to brush it off, to tell her that he wasn't ready for anything. But another part of Himone that he hadn't acknowledged in a long time felt a flutter of hope. "I don't know what to say," Ethan finally admitted. "I didn't expect this. I didn't think. I wasn't sure I could feel that way about anyone again, not after everything with Claire." Lily smiled softly, her expression filled with understanding. "I know. I don't want to rush you, Ethan, but I wanted to be honest. Whatever happens, I'm glad we've become friends. And if something more comes out of this, then maybe that's just the next step for both of us." Ethan sat back, absorbing her words. There was still a lot of healing to do, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for a relationship. But Lily had been a light in his life, a constant source of support, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to realize that the future wasn't something he had to face alone. The days following his conversation with Lily were filled with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. Ethan had never been one to jump into relationships, not after everything that had happened with Claire. He had spent months distancing himself from the world, focusing solely on his healing. The idea of opening up to someone again, of allowing someone to get close, seemed like a terrifying leap. Yet, in the quiet moments, when he wasn't consumed by work or thoughts of the past, Ethan couldn't ignore the feelings that had begun to blossom within him. There was something about Lily, something in the way she understood him, in the way she saw him as more than just the man who had been betrayed. She saw him for who he was now, the man trying to rebuild, trying to find a path forward. But still, doubt lingered in his mind. Was he truly ready for this? For a future with someone else? Or was this just another way to fill the empty space left by his broken past? The next few days, Ethan kept his distance. He saw Lily a couple of times at the cafe, where they exchanged friendly, albeit more cautious, greetings. But Ethan couldn't help but feel like a wall had gone up between them. It wasn't that he didn't enjoy her company, on the contrary. He found himself drawn to her warmth and genuine kindness. But he wasn't sure how to navigate this new territory. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't want to lead her on. And most of all, he didn't want to risk his own heart again. But as he walked through town one afternoon, his mind heavy with uncertainty, he found himself standing in front of the small community center. The building was busy with the sounds of a weekend market, but he wasn't paying attention to that. His eyes were fixed on the small flyer posted on the bulletin board outside. It was an advertisement for a hiking trip, something the community was organizing for anyone interested. The flyer read, "A journey of self-discovery and healing through nature." It struck a chord within him. He had been doing a lot of self-discovery already, but in some ways, he was still avoiding the hard questions. What did he want? What was he really searching for? Could he trust again? The idea of spending a weekend in nature, away from distractions, with the sole purpose of clearing his mind and finding peace, seemed like exactly what he needed. Without thinking, Ethan pulled the flyer off the board and slipped it into his pocket. He wasn't sure yet if he would go, but something about it felt right. Maybe it was time to face his fears, to really confront the things he had been hiding from. It wasn't just about the project at the community center or the work he was doing to help the town. It was about him, his healing, his future, and his heart. Later that evening, as Ethan sat on his porch, gazing out at the mountains, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. The air was cool and fresh, and the faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees filled the quiet evening. It was moments like these, when everything around him was calm, that he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had gone through. The loss of Claire, the betrayal, the feeling of being unmordied still hurt, but now it wasn't all-consuming. As he sat in the stillness, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lily. "Hey, Ethan, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I just want you to know that there's no rush. I care about you, but I don't want you to feel pressured. Whatever you need, I'm here. No expectations, just friendship." Ethan read the message several times. He could feel the sincerity in her words, the kindness that had always been present in their conversations. She wasn't asking for anything more than his honesty. She wasn't pushing him. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt relief. He thought about replying right away, but then he remembered the hiking trip flyer in his pocket. Maybe it was time to take that step to get away from the distractions and really think about what he wanted. So, instead of texting her back immediately, he put his phone down and decided to think things through. The next morning, Ethan woke up early, as he often did, and packed a small bag for the hiking trip. He hadn't signed up officially yet, but he knew deep down that this was what he needed. The hike would be a way to reconnect with himself, to get back to the basics. It wasn't about running away, it was about running toward something. Peace, clarity, healing. The drive to the trailhead was peaceful. The road winding through the dense forest, the sun rising behind the mountains. The sky was painted with soft hues of orange and pink, and Ethan felt a sense of awe as he watched the landscape come alive. He had hiked many trails before, but this one felt different. This was his journey, his personal quest to confront the remnants of his past and embrace the future. When he arrived at the trail, he was greeted by a small group of people, all strangers to him. They were a mix of locals and visitors, each there for their own reasons. Some were solo hikers, others were couples, and a few appeared to be regulars from the town. They were all there to take part in a weekend of reflection, of self-discovery, and Ethan felt a sense of camaraderie with them, even though he didn't know a single one of them. As they set off on the trail, the group moved in silence, each person walking at their own pace, taking in the beauty of the surroundings. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the soft crunch of dirt beneath their feet. For a while, Ethan walked in the back of the group, allowing his mind to wander. It wasn't until they reached the clearing, where the group stopped to take a break and enjoy the view, that Ethan felt a shift inside of him. The mountains stretched out before him, vast and unending. It was as though the world had opened up before him, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was trapped by his past. He felt free. The weight on his chest had lifted, and the pain he had been carrying seemed lighter. As he sat on a rock, looking out at the expanse of nature, Ethan allowed himself to be vulnerable. He allowed himself to feel everything, the sadness, the anger, the hurt, but also the hope. The possibility of a new beginning. Later that evening, as the group gathered around a campfire, one of the hikers shared a story about a difficult time in their life and how they had found healing in nature. It was a simple story, but it resonated deeply with Ethan. He wasn't the only one who had been through hardship. He wasn't the only one who had been broken. But they were all here, sharing this experience, growing together in their own way. After the fire had burned down to embers and most of the group had gone to bed, Ethan stayed by the fire, gazing at the stars above. He felt a strange sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He had taken the first step toward healing, and that step, though small, had been monumental. The next morning, as the group hiked back down the mountain, Ethan felt lighter. He was still processing everything: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the changes in his life. But he knew he was no longer running from it. He was confronting it. He was taking it in stride. And that was enough for now. When he returned to town, the first thing he did was message Lily. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I just want you to know, I'm grateful for you. I'm not sure where this is going, but I'm willing to see where it leads. Let's take it slow." He didn't expect anything immediate, and he wasn't rushing into anything. But he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time, he felt ready to move forward. The weeks following Ethan's hiking trip marked a new chapter in his life. The mountain air still lingered in his lungs, and the clarity he had found on the trail carried him through his days. He was no longer the man who had arrived in the town, consumed by hurt and anger. He was someone who had confronted his pain and, in doing so, found a path forward. But even as he made progress, there were moments when doubt crept back in. The past wasn't something you could simply erase. It lived within him, woven into the fabric of his memories. There were nights when the ache would return, when he would sit on his porch, staring out at the distant mountains, and wonder if he had truly healed. But each time, he reminded himself that healing was a journey, not a destination. One of the most significant shifts in Ethan's life had been his growing connection with Lily. After their conversation about their feelings for one another, things between them had taken a more intimate turn. They weren't rushing into anything. Neither of them was ready for that. But there was a sense of mutual understanding and respect that grew between them with each passing day. They spent more time together, talking about their dreams, their struggles, and their hopes for the future. It wasn't just about romantic chemistry, it was about something deeper. Ethan found himself not only attracted to Lily, but also trusting her in ways he hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. They went on hikes together, shared quiet dinners, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. There was a comfort between them, a safe space that Ethan hadn't realized he needed. It was clear that Lily wasn't asking for more than what he was willing to give. And that, Ethan realized, was exactly what he needed: someone who was patient, who understood the weight of his past, and who wasn't trying to rush him into something he wasn't ready for. One evening, after a long day of work at the community center, Ethan met Lily at the cafe. He had been busy with the sustainable building project, balancing meetings, designs, and 100 small tasks. The work was rewarding, but it left him drained by the end of each day. Lily was sitting at their usual table by the window when he walked in. She smiled when she saw him, a soft and genuine expression that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. He couldn't explain it, but every time he saw her, it felt like a spark, something new and exciting yet comforting. "Long day?" Lily asked as she gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Yeah," Ethan sighed as he sat down. "But it's going well. The project is really starting to come together. I think we're going to make a real impact here." "I'm glad to hear that," Lily said, her eyes bright with encouragement. "You've worked so hard on it. You deserve to see it succeed." Ethan smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Thanks. I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. You were right about me getting involved with something meaningful again." Lily reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. The touch was simple, yet it sent a jolt of warmth through him. "There's something I've been thinking about," Lily said, her voice a little quieter now. Ethan raised an eyebrow, sensing that she had something important to say. "What's on your mind?" Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I think we're both doing well, taking things one step at a time. But I wanted to let you know that I'm here for whatever you need. If you ever feel like you're not ready for more, I'll respect that. I don't want you to feel any pressure." Ethan felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Lily's honesty and patience had been one of the things that made their connection so special. She wasn't rushing him, wasn't expecting him to be anyone he wasn't ready to be. "I appreciate that," Ethan said softly, meeting her eyes. I think I'm ready to take the next step. Not rushing, just seeing where it goes." Lily's face lit up, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. "I'm not asking for anything, Ethan, but if you're ready, then that's enough for me." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was on the right path. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that, with Lily by his side, he was ready to face it. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to grow. They spent more time together, enjoying the small moments, the quiet walks through the forest, the laughter-filled dinners at the cafe, and the long talks that stretched into the night. With each passing day, Ethan realized that he was learning to trust again. He wasn't just trusting Lily. He was learning to trust himself. The sustainable building project was moving forward, too. Ethan's role in the community was becoming more defined as the plans for the eco-friendly buildings started to take shape. He was proud of the work they were doing, but it wasn't just the project that kept him going. It was the sense of purpose it gave him. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was making a real difference. One afternoon, as Ethan was reviewing the final plans for a new community center, Sarah, the environmental education coordinator, walked into his office. "Hey, Ethan," she said with a smile. "I wanted to check in and see how things are going. The community's really excited about the project, and I've been getting some great feedback from the schools. They're eager to get involved." "That's awesome," Ethan said, standing up to shake her hand. "Everything's coming together pretty well on our end. I think we're on track for the timeline we set. The contractors are already starting the groundwork for the first building." "That's great to hear. I've been thinking," Sarah began, her expression thoughtful. "This project could really use some local involvement. I was talking to some of the teachers, and they mentioned how great it would be to get the kids involved in learning about sustainable architecture, maybe a hands-on project, something they can build and take pride in." Ethan's eyes lit up. "I love that idea. It would give them a real connection to the project, and it's exactly the kind of thing that could help the community feel more involved." "I thought you'd be on board," Sarah said, grinning. "I'll work with the schools to set up some workshops. Maybe we can have a small group of kids help design a portion of the community garden, or even assist with some of the building tasks." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. "Let's make it happen. It'll be great for the kids, and it'll give the community something to be proud of." As Ethan worked on the project and his relationship with Lily deepened, he began to feel a sense of stability in his life that he hadn't thought possible just a few months ago. He wasn't rushing to forget the past, but he was learning to live with it. The memories of Claire, the betrayal, the pain, they were still there, but they no longer defined him. What mattered now was who he was becoming, the man who had found his way back to the world, to people, and to a future he could embrace. That evening, as he sat on his porch with Lily, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Ethan realized that he wasn't afraid of the future anymore. He didn't know what would come, but for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to it. The road ahead wasn't easy, but with Lily by his side, and a community that had accepted him, Ethan knew that anything was possible. "I'm glad we're doing this," Lily said softly, her hand resting in his. "Me too," Ethan replied, his heart full. "Me too." Ethan's life had begun to take shape again, piece by piece, like a puzzle slowly coming together after years of scattered fragments. He had found a sense of purpose in the community project, and his relationship with Lily had blossomed into something real, something genuine. The future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. For the first time in a long time, he felt grounded. But as is often the case with life, things don't always stay calm for long. Just when he thought everything was falling into place, an unexpected event shook him to his core. It was a Thursday morning when Sarah called him. Ethan had just finished a meeting with the contractors about the progress of the community center, and the morning sunlight was pouring into his office as he sipped his coffee. The phone buzzed on his desk, and he saw Sarah's name flashing on the screen. "Hey Sarah, everything okay?" Ethan answered, still trying to shake off the weariness from the morning. "Ethan, I need you to come down to the community center as soon as you can," Sarah said, her voice strained. "There's been an incident, and I think you'll want to know about it." The weight in her tone made Ethan's stomach tighten. "What happened?" he asked, his mind racing. "It's the foundation for the first building. There's been a problem with the excavation. The construction crew uncovered something underground. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but we need you here to assess it." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. By the time Ethan arrived at the community center, the site was buzzing with activity. The construction crew was gathered around, speaking in hushed tones, while Sarah stood nearby, waiting for him. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ethan," she said, stepping forward when she saw him. "I'm sorry to drag you out here like this, but you need to see what's going on." Ethan followed Sarah to the site, where the excavation had been temporarily halted. The area was roped off, and a tarp covered a section of the ground that had been disturbed. Ethan knelt beside the tarp, his curiosity piqued. One of the workers, a burly man in a hard hat, stepped forward and pulled the tarp back. What lay beneath was unlike anything Ethan expected. A large, weathered chest, partially buried in the earth. The wood was cracked and aged, the metal handles rusted, but it was unmistakable. This was an artifact, and it had been here for decades, perhaps even centuries. Ethan's mind raced. The town was built on old land that had a history far older than the modern homes and buildings that dotted the landscape. But this was something different. This was a discovery that could change everything. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with awe. "We don't know," Sarah replied. "We were digging, and the earth just gave way to it. We're not sure what's inside yet, but whatever it is, it's been here for a long time. We had to stop the work to prevent any damage." Ethan's fingers brushed against the weathered wood, tracing the edges of the chest. The discovery felt surreal. The history of this town, the land he had come to love, was right here, buried beneath the ground. There was no telling what secrets this chest held. "This could change the whole direction of the project," Ethan muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "This is big." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "And that's not all. We've called in a local historian to help us understand the significance of this find. But whatever we do, it could impact the future of the community center. We may need to move the site, or even reconsider our plans." Ethan stood up, his mind racing. The historical value of the chest was undeniable, but so was the importance of the project he had worked so hard to bring to life. The community center was supposed to be a place of hope, of forward thinking, a symbol of what the future could be. But now, with this discovery, everything was uncertain. "I need some time to think about this," Ethan said, stepping back from the excavation site. "We can't make any decisions hastily." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of the situation. "Take the time you need. We'll keep things on hold here until you've had a chance to decide." The next few days were filled with confusion and second-guessing. Ethan spent hours poring over blueprints, considering the implications of the find. The discovery could delay the entire project, possibly even put it on hold indefinitely. It could force the town to reevaluate its future plans, to compromise on the vision that had seemed so clear just a few weeks ago. But what if the chest held something significant? What if it was a key piece of the town's history, something that could draw people in, something that could become part of the very foundation of their community? The historical value was undeniable, but what would the town gain by preserving the past when they had worked so hard to create something for the future? As Ethan sat in his cabin that night, staring out at the stars, he thought about everything that had led him to this point. His life had been up and deadened once by Claire, then by the betrayal, and now, just when he thought he had found some stability, everything felt uncertain again. He had worked so hard to build something new, something that could be a symbol of healing for him and for the town. But now, with the discovery, he was faced with a difficult choice. Lily had been there through it all, her steady presence, providing a sense of calm when everything around him felt chaotic. They had spent hours talking about the project, about his past, about their future. And tonight, as they sat together on the porch of his cabin, Ethan knew he needed her advice. "Lily," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about this discovery. The chest, the history of it. It could change everything. But it's not just about the project anymore. It's about the future of this town. And I don't know if I should keep pushing forward, or if we should halt everything and preserve the past." Lily turned to him, her eyes full of understanding. "Ethan, you've been through so much, and I know how much this project means to you. But remember that progress doesn't always mean leaving the past behind. Sometimes, the past is a part of the future. Maybe this is a chance for the town to honor both what's come before and what's to come. You don't have to choose one over the other. You can find a way to bring them together." Ethan considered her words, his mind swirling with possibilities. "But how do we do that? How do I balance the vision I've worked so hard for with the history that's been uncovered?" Lily reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to do it alone, Ethan. This town is your family now. They'll help you. And whatever you decide, I'll be right here, supporting you." Ethan looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through him. He wasn't alone. He hadn't been for a long time. And for the first time in a while, he felt a sense of clarity. He didn't need to choose between the past and the future. The future could honor the past, and he would find a way to make that happen. The decision Ethan faced was a heavy one, but in the days following his conversation with Lily, he found himself at peace with it. The discovery of the chest had taken him by surprise, but rather than pushing him back into doubt, it had propelled him forward. The town's history, now so intimately tied to the project, wasn't something to be feared or avoided, it was something to be celebrated. The community center, which had been designed as a symbol of new beginnings, would now also represent the town's past, bridging the gap between what had come before and what was yet to be. After consulting with the town council, Sarah, and the local historian they had brought in, Ethan made the decision to incorporate the chest into the project. The chest would be preserved and displayed in a new, dedicated space within the community center. The site would become a fusion of modern design and historical preservation. It would be a place where the town's residents could connect with both their history and their futura, a place where stories could be shared and new memories made. As the project moved forward, the excitement was palpable. The locals, once hesitant about the changes, now rallied behind the idea of honoring the past while embracing the future. Ethan watched as the town came together, each person adding their own touch to the building's design and the community center's vision. It was more than just construction. It was a manifestation of the unity the town had found through their shared effort. The weeks flew by, and before long, the groundbreaking ceremony was set. Ethan stood at the front of the site, wearing a hard hat and a reflective vest, as he looked out over the crowd of townspeople gathered to celebrate the beginning of something new. Lily stood by his side, her eyes warm and supportive as she smiled at him. There was a quiet confidence in her presences. He wasn't just his girlfriend now, but a constant source of grounding, someone who made him believe that he could face whatever came next. "It's a big day, huh?" Lily said softly, nudging him gently. Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "It is. I never imagined it would turn out this way, so much more than I thought it could be. But I'm glad. This town deserves it." As the town's mayor gave a brief speech, Ethan's thoughts wandered. He remembered the first days he had arrived in the town, unsure of what to expect, hiding from his pain, keeping to himself. Now, here he was, standing at the forefront of a project that would shape the town's future. And more than that, he was standing beside a woman who had taught him what it meant to trust again. A woman who had helped him see that the future wasn't something to fear, but something to create. The moment the ceremonial shovel hit the dirt, signaling the official start of construction, the crowd erupted into applause. Ethan stood there, a small smile on his face as he took in the scene. This was more than just a building. This was a testament to everything he had worked through, everything he had learned. This was a new beginning. The following months were a blur of activity. The excavation site was buzzing with workers, the foundations of the community center taking shape. Ethan was there nearly every day, overseeing the work, consulting with the contractors, and checking the designs. The excitement of seeing the plans come to life kept him going, even when the days grew long and the work seemed never-ending. But there was something different now. Ethan was no longer working to prove something to himself. He was working for the community, for the people who had trusted him and believed in the vision. He was working for the future, his future, and the town's future. Lily was by his side throughout it all. Her involvement in the project had grown from just offering moral support to becoming an active participant. She helped organize fundraising events, recruited volunteers, and even assisted with the educational programs that would run within the center once it was completed. Ethan had never imagined a partnership like this one built not only on love, but also on shared values and a common purpose. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of Ethan's cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Lily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Ethan," she said, her voice quiet, "I've been thinking a lot about how far we've come. You've built so much this project, your new life here. You've rebuilt more than just the community center. You've rebuilt yourself." Ethan smiled at her words, a small but genuine smile. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lily. I wouldn't have even started if it weren't for you. You've been my anchor. You remind me that it's okay to hope again." Lily reached over and took his hand, her fingers gently brushing against his. "I'm just glad you took that first step. You didn't let the past define you. And now, look at everything you've done. You're not just helping this town, you're showing people that they can rebuild too." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. It wasn't just the project that had given him purpose. It was the people he had met along the way. The friends, the neighbors, the community that had embraced him. And it was Lily, whose love and patience had helped him find the courage to open his heart again. As the community center neared completion, Ethan found himself reflecting on everything he had experienced. The loss, the betrayal, the pain, they had all been part of his journey. But so had the healing, the growth, and the new relationships he had formed. He wasn't the same man who had arrived in this town months ago. He was stronger, more whole, and more willing to embrace the future. And that future was bright. The grand opening of the community center was scheduled for early spring, and the town was buzzing with excitement. Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. The project would serve as a symbol of what the town had overcome together and what they could accomplish in the future. As he stood on the stage during the opening ceremony, surrounded by the community, Lily by his side, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. This wasn't just a project. This was his story, a story of redemption, healing, and new beginnings. The future wasn't a far-off dream. It was right here, right now, and Ethan was ready for it.